Welcome back to the guided study of Act 3 of Romeo and Juliet. We ended last time with scenes 3 and 4. Now remember, at the end of scene 3, we saw Romeo in the friar's cell, and he was very distraught because he was banished. But the friar came up with a plan, that tonight he would go to see Juliet, to be with her as man and wife. But tomorrow he would leave before the watch was set to go to Mantua, where he would live until the friar could tell everybody about his and Juliet's marriage and bring him back again. In scene 4, we saw the Capulets talking to Paris. And remember, Capulet plans to have Juliet marry Paris in 3 days' time, on Thursday. Scene 5 takes place in Juliet's room, and it is the next morning, so now it is a Tuesday. We're going to see both Juliet and Romeo. They have just spent the night together as man and wife. What they're talking about at the start of this scene is whether or not it's morning, whether or not it's time for Romeo to leave. Juliet, of course, wants him to stay. Romeo wants himself to stay, but remember, he has to leave before the guards come out. So he has to leave before the sun rises. So I want you to go ahead and pause me now and read to line 67 of scene 5. So at the start of scene 5, Juliet is trying to get Romeo to stay, and she's talking about birds here. Now, a lark is a bird of the morning, and a nightingale is a bird of the night. So Juliet is swearing that the bird they heard chirping outside is a nightingale, meaning it's still night, not a lark, which would indicate that it's morning. But Romeo says on line 11, "I must be gone and live, or stay and die." Juliet continues to try to convince him to stay, and Romeo says on line 17, "Let me be taken, let me be put to death. I am content, so thou wilt have it so." So he says, well, if you wish me to stay, I will stay, but be put to death for it. So he's kind of joking around with Juliet here, and then Juliet realizes it is a lark singing, and she says, "Be gone, away, leave before they find you." So as Romeo is climbing down the ladder and preparing to leave, the nurse enters and tells them that Juliet's mother is coming to her room. On line 39, the nurse says, "Your lady mother is coming to your chamber." So then Juliet and Romeo really start to hurry and bid each other farewell. Juliet asks Romeo on line 44, "I must hear from thee every day in the hour." So she says, "Write to me every day." And she says on line 50, "Oh, thinkst thou we shall ever meet again?" Romeo on line 151 says, "I doubt it not." Then Juliet says on lines 53 to 56, "O God, I have an ill divining soul. Methinks I see thee, now thou art below, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb." So here again, we have an instance of foreshadowing, where she's comparing Romeo to someone who is dead. Romeo finally leaves, and then Lady Capulet enters the scene. Now, Juliet is very confused why her mother is here. First, because it's so early, but second, because her mother does not often visit her in her room without giving Juliet some warning or without having a reason to be there. So Juliet is a little confused as to why her mother is there. Now, we obviously know why Lady Capulet has come. She has come to inform Juliet that she will be marrying Paris on Thursday. So the next section I'm going to have you read, Lady Capulet is going to tell Juliet this news. I want you to pay close attention to how Juliet responds. Go ahead and pause me now and read to line 128. So here Lady Capulet enters, and she's asking Juliet all of these questions, like, why are you sad? And talking about Romeo. Juliet, without giving anything away, responds to her mother's questions and talks about her cousin's death from Romeo's hand in very vague language, so that it doesn't give anything away to her mother that Juliet and Romeo are married and in love. So they're having this back and forth conversation about Romeo. Lady Capulet calls him a villain. And on line 90, she says, "We will have vengeance for it. Fear thou not, then weep no more. I'll send to one in Mantua, where that same banished runagate doth live. shall give him such an unaccustomed dram that he shall soon keep Tybalt company. So again here we have an instance of foreshadowing. Lady Capulet threatens to send someone to Mantua to kill Romeo with poison. Now Juliet, of course, can't tell her mother that she doesn't want this to happen, but she says on line 99, if you could find out but a man to bear poison, I would temper it, that Romeo should upon receipt soon sleep in quiet. She's like, I would bring the poison to him myself. So again, skirting around the issue of her being in love with Romeo, but still having a conversation with her mother. Then Lady Capulet says, now I'll tell thee glad full tidings, girl. So Lady Capulet tells her on line 115, marry my child early next Thursday morn, the gallant young and noble gentleman, the County Paris, at St. Peter's Church shall happily make thee their joyful bride. So her mother tells Juliet the news, you are going to be married on Thursday. Well, of course, Juliet is not excited to hear this news. On line 120, she says, he shall not there make me a joyful bride. And on line 124, she says, I will not marry yet, and when I do, I swear it shall be Romeo, whom you know I hate, rather than Paris. So she's like, I would rather marry Romeo than Paris, which is some irony because, of course, we know she's already married to Romeo. Lady Capulet does not yet know this information. Then we see that Lord Capulet and the nurse are going to enter the room. Lady Capulet, at the end of this section you just read, says, here comes your father, tell him so yourself. So she wants Juliet to tell Lord Capulet exactly what she plans not to do, which is marry Paris. So what I would like you to do now is I would like you to read to line 212. And as you do, pay attention to how Capulet responds to his daughter's refusal to marry Paris. Go ahead and pause me now and read to line 212. When Capulet comes in, Juliet is still crying. And he's like, why are you crying? Oh, my poor girl. And he's being very sweet to her. And he asks his wife on line 141, have you delivered to her our decree? Lady Capulet responds, aye, sir, but she will none. She gives you thanks. I would the fool were married to her grave. So here again is another instance of foreshadowing where Lady Capulet is wishing that Juliet was dead. And Capulet says, what? She will not marry? Does she not give us thanks? Does she not consider herself blessed? And Juliet says on line 149, not proud, but thankful you have. Proud I can never be of what I hate, but thankful even for hate is meant love. So Juliet is trying to tell her father, I am appreciative, but I cannot marry Paris. And Capulet starts tearing into Juliet and calls her all sorts of names. He calls her a green sickness-carrying, baggage, tallow face. And he says on line 165, get thee to church a Thursday or never after look me in the face. So he says, you will go to church and marry Paris or you will never look me in the face. On line 171, he says to his wife, we have a curse in having her. And then the nurse tries to stand up and defend Juliet. Because remember, the nurse is the only one that knows that Juliet and Romeo are married in the Capulet house. So she says on line 173, God in heaven bless her, you are to blame, my lord, to rate her so. And then Lord Capulet turns on the nurse and starts calling the nurse names. And Lady Capulet tries to calm Lord Capulet down by saying, my lord, you are too hot, you need to calm down. But Capulet will not be calmed down. He continues to lash into Juliet, to scream at her, to verbally abuse her. And he says on line 200, and you will not wed, I'll pardon you, graze where you will, you shall not house with me. So he says, if you do not marry Paris, I will kick you out and you will no longer be welcome in this house. And he says on line 201, and you be not hang, beg, starve, die in the streets, for by my soul I'll ne'er acknowledge thee. So he says, I will kick you out and I will never acknowledge you. I will disown you. I don't care if you hang, if you starve, if you have to beg in the streets, if you die, I don't care. Juliet asks her mother for help once her father leaves the room, and Lady Capulet responds on line 211, "Talk not to me, for I'll not speak a word. Do as thou wilt, for I have done with me." So even Lady Capulet is casting aside her only child to stand by what her husband has said. You can imagine that Juliet is very distraught at this news. She's already married to Romeo, but now she's supposed to marry Paris in 2 days' time, because now it's Tuesday and they're supposed to be married on Thursday. So now it's only Juliet and the nurse left. So Juliet, in this next and last section, is going to be asking the nurse what she should do. Pay attention to how the nurse responds. Go ahead and pause me now and read to the end of scene 5. So in this last section of the scene, Juliet starts by asking the nurse, how shall this be prevented? And asks her what she should do. The nurse gives her a response on line 227. She says, "I think it best you married with the county." So the nurse here is saying, I think you should marry Paris. She continues on saying, "He's a lovely gentleman. Romeo's a dish-clout to him. An eagle, madam, hath not so green, so quick, so fair an eye as Paris hath." So she's continuing to give all of these reasons that Juliet should marry Paris, saying how handsome he is, how beautiful, and how Romeo is nothing compared to him. Juliet sees no way out of this. So she says to the nurse on line 242, "Go in and tell my lady I am gone, having displeased my father to Lawrence's cell to make confession and to be absolved." So she says to the nurse, "Go tell my mother and father that I have gone to Friar Lawrence for confession, to ask forgiveness for disobeying my father." But as soon as the nurse leaves, Juliet turns on her and calls her on line 246 an ancient damnation, oh most wicked fiend. So Juliet is cursing the nurse and saying how she will no longer share her secrets with the nurse, and says on line 251, "Thou and my bosom henceforth shall be twain." So she's saying, I will now only rely on myself and will never again rely on the nurse's counsel. And then in the last 2 lines, she says, "I'll to the friar to know his remedy. If all else fail, myself have power to die." We find out at the end of Act 3, Juliet plans to go to the friar to ask for his help. And she says if he can't help her, then she will kill herself. Another instance of foreshadowing. I leave you there with the end of Act 3. Make sure to fill out your final study guide and study for your Act 3 quiz. Now get thee gone!